So the thing that strikes me here actually is that, we have these three prongs or three tracks of intrigue, for lack of a better term, right? So we've had this one that we've known for a long time, the Steele dossier, the Steele track, and we have, of course, the intelligence community track, FBI, and so forth. This whole kind of realm of Sussman and Joffe, that's been what's being kind of elucidated in these Durham filings now. And so, are we at the end of this track, or is this just the beginning? What's your perception here?
I think we're probably somewhere in the middle. Whether will there be another pathway, another track that's brought forth? Um, I'm sure there'll be something. How big it is remains unknown. But I think this is probably to have a third pathway where before there was only two is pretty significant. And the fact that it involved the executive office of the president is also notable. Now we see that there was another group that was working underneath to create this data that was away from your traditional political operative of the Fusion GPS Chris Steele entity and people who actually had access inside government. I think that's maybe one of the biggest differences that we're experiencing here is this was somebody who was, access to government information directly, not your traditional political operative.
I agree with that. I think we are somewhere in the middle. The one remarkable thing about Durham is he drops these filings, and then you think it's a big bombshell, and then he comes up with another one, and then he comes up with another one. So I think he's still got a few aces up his sleeve. So we started off in September of 2021 when he introduced us to Joffe, the existence of Joffe. We didn't know about him and his role and his access, as Jeff said. And then he kept dropping other things. So the recent one, of course, where he dropped access to the executive office of the president and so on. There was another filing where he dropped a very peculiar kind of piece of information involving a visit by Sussman to Inspector General Michael Horowitz. He's the Inspector General of the DOJ. And of course, he sort of came to fame in 2018 because of his Clinton email investigation and 2019 because of the Carter Page FISA investigation. And for reasons that are not entirely clear at this point, in March of 2017, shortly after Horowitz had opened his IG's investigation into the Clinton email investigation, just kind of seeing if everything was done properly there, he got a visit from Sussman, Clinton's campaign lawyer. And all we know from Durham's filing is that Sussman kind of alerted him to the fact that one of his staff members in the IG's office, and we don't know who that staff member is, it could be Horowitz for all we know, had used a VPN in a foreign country. So that's a virtual private network. That's sort of where you're trying to hide your identity online. We don't know what the context for that is, what the visit is for. Why would an IG personally meet a lawyer who kind of calls up and says, hey, can I come in? It's all very, very unusual. So I'm sure that Durham has some more information there that at some point he's going to drop, and we're all going to probably be surprised again.
Well, and so this brings to mind, of course, who is the actual intended audience for these filings, right? There's this whole, on Cash's Corner, we talked about this, that, early on, the Sussman team basically went out and sort of demanded a lot of, discovery and so forth. And it seemed like Cash was arguing that this was a kind of a mistake because, and Durham responded by offering all sorts of information, right? To the point where the Sussman team responded, said, okay, no, this is too much information. In fact, you should stop giving information now. That's too much. Thank you very much. That's, of course, my interpretation. But so on the one hand, you could say the information is for, the general public knowledge that something's happening, new information that people didn't know for researchers. On the other hand, it could also very much be for, basically talking internally to the Department of Justice, to the lawyers, so saying, showing the hand, so to speak. So what is your take on this?
Well, that's our position on matters, is that Durham is, with every single filing he's made, there was another individual that was brought up, Charles Dolan. So every single filing that he's made, there's been this unexpected information that nobody thought we would get. And I think people have to understand the backdrop, and that is Durham is effectively operating in a hostile environment. The DOJ is not politically friendly to his efforts. It's being run by people, Lisa Monaco, John Carlin. These are folks that actually had involvement in the FBI's spying or the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane investigation back in 2016. So, you could even see a stretch where these people are at least questions being asked. So we think that what's going on is that Durham is making this information public as a means of combating any sort of pushback or shutdown of his investigation from the DOJ. We think it's very, very intentional to get this information out there, some of it which seems to be fairly alarming, that if indeed there was an effort to shut down his investigation, at this point, there's enough known that there would be just a chorus of questions being asked as to why that investigation was being shut down.
Yes, I agree. I think it's a bit of both. So let the public know about the progress of his investigation, but perhaps a slightly more emphasis on the fact of letting the people over at DOJ, Lisa Monaco, Carlin, people like that, who, by the way, were involved with not necessarily the Trump Swift boat project, but certainly on the White House side, Obama's White House side, with things like the intelligence community assessment, which kind of Brennan we talked about earlier, crafted to describe how Russia wanted to elect Trump. So these people were involved in that, and now I wouldn't say they're bosses, because of course Durham is special counsel, so he's kind of a bit separate, but he still has to get his budget signed off, and he still has to submit reports, and there's a bit of a turf war going on there for sure, and I'm sure that Durham is trying to prevent them kind of from shutting it off, and he's just kind of putting out enough for that not to happen. And that certainly happened with one of the recent filings when he revealed the spying on the executive office of the president, which, by the way, you mentioned Cash had said that Sussman probably now regrets having, his lawyers having asked for all this information. I agree. I mean, initially they were like, give us everything. And Durham was like, okay. So, and now, of course, he gave the information about the executive office of the president. And guess what Sussman's lawyers did? They filed a motion and said, no, that's too much. We don't include that kind of information. So, and then Durham came back and said, no, I needed to include that because guess what? One of the lawyers who was on Sussman's team right now worked in the executive office of the president under Obama during that period that's affected here. So Durham has always so far been able to kind of come back and explain not only what he's doing, but also explain why he's releasing certain information. And I think that's right. So Sussman asked for everything, he got everything.
Hans, just to clarify, so this is, you're talking, there was a lawyer that was working with the executive office of the president under Obama. Explain that a little bit.
Sure. So the period that Durham describes, where Joffe was basically mining data from the White House, starts in late 2016 when Obama was still around. There was a lawyer working there. I don't think he's named in these court filings. Anyway, that lawyer is now on the team of Sussman's defense. There's another lawyer who's mentioned in one of these recent Durham filings who worked for the law firm that's representing Sussman. And that lawyer was brought into the DOJ by Biden in January of 2021. So again, Durham made sure to flag that up. I think it's just in a footnote, but just sort of, and he says, and I understand, or we understand that this guy has now recused, or words to that effect. So it's always sort of a shot across the bow to DOJ, like, hey, we're keeping an eye on things.